Georgia, 1887. 3 generations moved as one through pine forests where moonlight barely penetrated. A grandmother whose hands had been shaped by cotton fields. A mother whose back bore the map of whip scars, and a daughter who had only ever known bondage. Their names were Ida, May, and Ruth, names they chose for themselves when they decided to reclaim their humanity. These weren't the names given at birth. Those had been lost somewhere in the ledger books of the Caldwell estate, a plantation that the law said no longer existed. 22 years had passed since emancipation, but no messenger ever reached those locked behind Caldwell's walls. No federal marshal came to verify. The manor sat 40 miles from civilization, surrounded by unforgiving swampland and dense wilderness. Travelers who occasionally wandered through were compensated generously for their silence. The 67 souls confined there had begun to accept that the outside world had simply erased them from memory. Ida had arrived in this world 56 years earlier, born into chains. She was 7 when her mother collapsed in the cotton fields and never rose. Her father remained a stranger to her. 4 decades of picking had transformed her hands into permanently curled claws, the fingers refusing to straighten no matter how she tried. Her daughter May, 34, knew a different kind of grief. 3 of her infants had been sold away before they learned to walk. The 4th, Ruth, she kept close as breath, making herself small, invisible, forgettable, anything to ensure her daughter survived. Ruth, 11 years old, had inherited her grandmother's watchful eyes and her mother's unyielding jaw. She worked indoors, scrubbing floors and serving meals to Caldwells, who looked through her as though she were made of air. But Ruth possessed knowledge the others didn't. In stolen moments, she had taught herself to read. Discarded newspapers, letters traced in dirt when overseers weren't watching. Through these fragments, she understood that the world beyond functioned differently. She understood their captivity was illegal. She told her mother, who told Ida, and together they conceived a plan with only 2 possible outcomes, freedom or death. Nothing in between existed. The plan appeared simple when spoken aloud. Wait for absolute darkness under the new moon. Carry only what you can hold. Head north until you reach the river. Cross it and continue until you find assistance. Or die trying. What they didn't know, what nobody spoke of because speech made it tangible, was that guns and dogs weren't their only obstacles. Something else inhabited the Caldwell estate. Something that dwelled in the spaces between the manor and the slave quarters. Something that materialized whenever anyone attempted flight. Old Samuel had tried in 1881. 3 days later, they discovered him at the property's edge, seated against an oak, eyes fixed open, heart stopped. No wounds, no struggle, just absolute terror frozen on his face. The overseers called it cardiac failure. The enslaved recognized the screams that first night, screams unlike any man chased by hounds or beaten by pursuers. Young Thomas attempted escape in 1883. He reached the river's vicinity before they tracked him for 2 days. When found, he breathed but wouldn't speak, wouldn't eat, simply stared at emptiness and shook uncontrollably. After a week, he walked into the swamp and vanished, his only words before disappearing. "It's still following me." Mary ran in 1885. They found her at dawn curled by the gate, repeating the same phrase. "Don't let it see you. Don't let it see you. Don't let it see you." She died 3 days later. Fever, they claimed, but her eyes never stopped tracking something invisible across the ceiling. Ida knew these accounts. May knew them too. They chose not to share them with Ruth. Supernatural terror needn't compound the very real dangers they already faced. Besides, fear distorted memory. Trauma made people hallucinate. Whatever happened to Samuel Thomas and Mary probably resulted from psychological breaking under extreme pressure. That's what Ida told herself as they prepared. That's what May whispered during moments of midnight doubt. They were rational women. They rejected ghosts, demons, curses. They believed in men with whips, dogs with teeth, bullets that killed. Those constituted real threats. Those warranted fear. October 3rd, 1887. The new moon brought no light. The sky stretched like black cloth without stars. Clouds had rolled in at sunset, thick and oppressive. The air hung heavy with unshed rain. Perfect conditions. Visibility would approach zero. Chasers would stumble as blindly as the chased. Ida, May, and Ruth gathered behind their cabin. Darkest clothing. Minimal possessions. Dried meat wrapped in cloth, a water jar, and a knife May had concealed from the kitchen 6 months prior. They said no farewells. Goodbyes created witnesses. Witnesses meant someone could be beaten into revealing the escape route. They moved silently, Ida led. Old, but possessing unmatched knowledge of the land. Every field she'd worked, every path she'd walked, she knew where ground would hold footprints and where it would betray them. May followed, one hand on Ida's shoulder. Ruth came last, one hand gripping May's back. Through darkness, they moved as a single organism. The first hour passed easily. Low to the ground, slow movement, frequent pauses to listen. Dogs barked distantly, but not yet hunting. Voices carried from the manor, laughter, music. Master Caldwell entertained guests. Perfect. Attention focused elsewhere. They reached the tree line and slipped into forest. Darkness became absolute. Ida navigated by memory and touch, feeling for landmarks memorized during years of wood. Gatherings and oak split by lightning, a boulder cracked through the middle, a creek bed dry since summer. 2 hours in, Ruth stumbled. Her foot caught on a root, and she fell hard. May caught her before any sound escaped. They froze, listening. Nothing. No shouts. No dogs. No pursuit. Ruth stood, favoring her left ankle but able to walk. They continued. 3 hours in, they first heard it. A sound that didn't belong. Not dogs. Not men. Not any recognizable animal. Distant behind them, almost like breathing, but too loud, too deliberate. It rose and fell with a rhythm that felt fundamentally wrong, triggering something primitive that screamed danger. Ida stopped. May bumped into her. Ruth grabbed her mother's dress. They stood in absolute darkness, holding breath, listening. The sound continued momentarily, then ceased. Silence. Complete total silence. No insects, no birds, no wind, nothing. The forest had died. Grandmother, Ruth whispered. What was that? Hush, child, Ida whispered back. Just an animal. Keep moving. But Ida's hand trembled as she reached back for May's shoulder. May felt it, said nothing. They walked again, faster now. 4 hours in, they reached Ida's planned first checkpoint, a clearing where 3 paths converged. Straight north toward the river, northeast toward higher ground, northwest toward the old logging road. Ida had intended to go straight north, the most direct route. Now she hesitated. The sound returned. Closer, definitely closer. That same wrong breathing, but accompanied by something new, a clicking like nails on wood, claws on stone, rhythmic, purposeful, moving. It's following us, May said. Her voice remained controlled, but underneath lay pure terror. It's just... Ida started. Don't, May interrupted. Don't tell me it's just an animal. Animals don't sound like that. Animals don't make the forest go silent. Ruth pressed closer to her mother. What do we do? Ida made her decision. We'll go northeast. Higher ground. Harder to track. We move fast. They took the northeast path and ran. Not the careful, quiet movement they'd maintained. Actual running. Branches whipped faces. Roots grabbed feet. They didn't care. Behind them, the sound transformed. Breathing became faster. Clicking grew louder. Whatever pursued them knew they were running. And it was running too. 5 hours in, Ida's legs failed. She went down gasping. May and Ruth hauled her up. I can't, Ida wheezed. Leave me. Take Ruth and go. No, May said flatly. We all make it or none of us do. Mama's right, Ruth said. We don't leave family. They heard it then. Closer than ever, perhaps 50 yards behind. The breathing sounded harsh now, excited. The clicking had become a gallop, joined by a new sound. Low, almost like words but not quite. Like something attempting speech with a mouth not designed for speaking. Go. Ida gasped. Please. It wants something. Give it me. Save yourselves. May looked at her mother, looked at her daughter, made a choice that would define everything that followed. We stay together, she said. If we die free and together. She pulled the knife from the sack. Ruth grabbed a heavy branch from the ground. Ida stood, her old body finding strength from somewhere deep. They formed a triangle, backs together, facing outward into darkness. The sound stopped. Complete silence again. They waited. Their breathing sounded loud in their own ears. Hearts hammered. Sweat ran down faces despite the cool night air. Then they saw it. Not clearly. Darkness remained too complete for that. But they saw movement. A shadow darker than surrounding shadows. Big. Bigger than a man. It moved wrong. Not like an animal on 4 legs. Not like a human on 2. Something between. Something that shifted and flowed. It circled them. They turned with it, trying to keep it in front. Ruth cried silently. May gripped the knife until her hand ached. Ida prayed under her breath, words from a childhood nearly forgotten. The thing stopped. They felt it watching them, felt its attention like physical weight. Then it spoke. Not in any language they knew, not in any voice that should emerge from a living throat, but they understood anyway. Meaning bypassed ears and entered directly into minds. Return. One word, but it carried weight, command, absolute certainty that disobedience meant something worse than death. No, May said. Her voice shook but held firm. We're free. We're leaving. The thing moved closer. They could almost see it now, almost make out a shape. Tall. Too many angles. Parts of it seemed to occupy spaces that shouldn't exist. Looking at it hurt their eyes, made their minds rebel. Return. This time the word carried images. Flashes of Samuel dead against the tree, Thomas walking into the swamp, Mary curled and whispering, and others, so many others. Decades of runners who had tried and failed. All stopped by this guardian, this curse that Caldwell had somehow bound to his land. How? Ruth whispered. How is it doing this? Ida understood. Old stories came together. Whispers she'd heard decades ago about Caldwell's grandfather. Different from ordinary men, knowledgeable about things God, fearing folk didn't discuss. He'd bound something to this land. Something to keep his property from escaping. Even after death, even after the law changed, the binding remained. It can't leave the property, Ida said suddenly. That's why it herds people back. Why it terrorizes them until they return or die. It's bound here. If we can get past the boundary, we're free. How far? May asked. I don't know. Maybe a mile. Maybe less. The thing moved again, faster now. It was done talking. They ran. Behind them, it came. The sounds it made now weren't attempting anything natural, pure wrongness, sounds that hurt to hear, sounds that made teeth ache and stomachs turn. But they ran. Ida led them uphill. Her lungs burned. Her heart hammered irregularly, but she pushed. May pulled Ruth along. Ruth's ankle screamed with every step, but she didn't slow. They crashed through brush. They fell in rows. They ran. The thing was right behind them now. They felt its breath, if breath was what it had. Cold, so cold frost formed on the backs of their necks, despite the warm night. Ruth looked back once. She saw something that would live in her nightmares forever. Too many eyes, too many mouths. A shape wrong in every way a shape could be wrong. Then Ida fell. Not from exhaustion this time. She clutched her chest and went down hard. May skidded to a stop. Ruth stumbled back to them. The thing loomed overhead. This close, it blotted out what little light filtered through clouds. This close, they could see it wasn't one thing but many. Shapes of people twisted and merged. The thing Caldwell's grandfather had created from souls of those who died on this land. A gestalt of suffering and anger and pain, bound to one purpose: prevent escape. Go, Ada gasped. Blood flecked her lips. Both of you run. I'm done. But you ran not. Grandmother. No. Ida looked up at the thing. You want something to stop. Fine, take me, but let them pass. One life. That's the bargain. One stays, two go. The thing seemed to consider this. Its many eyes turned toward May and Ruth, then back to Ida. Some intelligence worked behind that horrible form. Some calculation. No bargains, May said. If grandmother stays, I stay. Ruth runs. Ruth runs. Mama, I can't. You can and you will. May spoke fiercely. You're 11 years old. You have a whole life ahead. We're old. We're tired. We've lived enough. But you haven't. So when I say run, you run. And you don't stop. And you don't look back. You understand me? Ruth cried too hard to speak. She nodded. May handed her the knife, handed her the sack, kissed her forehead. You're the bravest person I know. Braver than me. Braver than your grandmother. You're going to make it, and you're going to live free. And someday, when you're old and safe, you'll tell your children about us. You'll make sure we're remembered. That's how we survive, through you. Ada reached up and took Ruth's hand. Run, baby. Run and don't stop. The boundary is close. I can feel it. Just keep going north. You'll know when you cross it. Everything will change. The air will feel different. And that thing won't be able to follow. Now go. The thing moved forward. Ida and May stood. They faced it together. Mother and daughter. Two women who had survived decades of hell. Two women who would make their last act one of love. Ruth, May said without turning. Run now. Ruth ran. She ran and she did look back. She saw her mother and grandmother standing together facing the darkness. She saw the thing engulf them. She heard sounds she would never be able to describe. She ran faster. Ruth ran until her lungs felt ready to burst, until her injured ankle gave out completely, and she crashed face first into the forest floor. She lay there gasping, sobbing, her whole body shaking with exhaustion and grief and terror. Behind her, the sounds had stopped. The forest was silent again. Not the dead silence from before, but natural silence. Cricket sounds. Wind in leaves. An owl calling somewhere distant. She forced herself to sit up. Her face bled from a dozen small cuts. Her ankle had swollen to twice its normal size. The supply sack was gone, dropped somewhere in her flight. She had only the knife, still clutched so tightly her fingers had cramped around it. Ruth listened for the thing, listened for pursuit. Nothing. She tried to feel its presence, that weight of attention that had pressed down on them. Nothing. Either it was gone, satisfied with its prize, or she had crossed the boundary. She didn't know which. She was terrified to believe she was safe, terrified that the moment she relaxed it would appear. But she couldn't stay here. Dawn would come in a few hours. When the sun rose, Caldwell's men would discover 3 people missing. They would send trackers. They would send dogs. Real dogs this time, not supernatural horrors, but dangerous all the same. She had to keep moving. Ruth stood testing her ankle. White, hot pain shot up her leg. She wouldn't be running anymore. But she could walk. She could limp. She could crawl if she had to. She thought of her mother's last words, run and don't stop. She amended them in her mind, move and don't stop. She picked a direction she hoped was north and started walking. The forest around her grew thick with undergrowth. Spanish moss hung from trees like burial shrouds. The ground turned soft, treacherous, full of hidden holes and roots. Every step brought agony. Every step took her farther from everything she had ever known. After an hour, she found a creek. The water ran dark and slow, moving but tasted clean. She drank deeply, then soaked her ankle in the cold water. It helped a little. She tore strips from her dress to wrap it tight. Not much, but something. She followed the creek downstream, reasoning that water led to larger water, and larger water led to towns. The sky began lightening. Gray dawn filtered through the canopy. She could see better now, which meant she could be seen better too. She stayed close to the water, ready to hide at any sound. As the sun rose fully, Ruth allowed herself to think about what had happened, about what she had seen, about the thing that had taken her mother and grandmother. Was it real? Had exhaustion and fear made her hallucinate? But no, they had all seen it, all heard it, all felt it. It was real. As real as the scars on her back from the one time she'd been caught stealing food. As real as the hunger she'd lived with every day of her life. What had Ida said? That Caldwell's grandfather had bound something to the land. That old man had died before Ruth was born, but stories about him persisted. He'd been strange, kept to himself, owned books normal folk didn't read, received visitors at odd hours. People said he'd made a deal with something dark to maintain his wealth, to ensure his slaves could never truly be free, even if the law said otherwise. Ruth had always thought those were just stories. Every plantation had ghost stories. Every old house had legends. But now she knew better. The thing was real. The binding was real, and her mother and grandmother had died because of it. She pushed the grief down. There would be time for grief later, if she survived. Right now, she needed to focus on walking, on breathing, on not dying in these woods. She was 11 years old and alone and injured and being hunted. Grief was a luxury she couldn't afford. By midday, Ruth knew she was in trouble. Her ankle had worsened despite the wrapping. Every step sent lightning bolts of pain up her leg. She felt dizzy from lack of food. The dried meat had been in the sack she'd lost. She had water from the creek, but water wasn't enough. She needed rest. She needed food. She needed help. The creek had widened into a small river. On the far bank, she could see a structure through the trees. A cabin, perhaps, or a shed. Signs of human habitation. She needed to be careful. Not all humans were safe. Some would turn her in for reward money. Some would do worse. But she didn't have many options. She could feel her body starting to shut down. If she didn't get help soon, she would collapse and never get up. She had to take the risk. Ruth crossed the river at a shallow point, the cold water shocking her system into alertness. She climbed the far bank and moved toward the structure. It was a cabin, old and weathered but maintained. Smoke rose from a chimney. Someone was home. She crept closer, staying in the tree line. Through a gap, she could see the front of the cabin. A woman sat on the porch, shelling peas into a bowl. She was black, middle-aged, with gray streaking her hair. She hummed while she worked. Some old spiritual Ruth recognized but couldn't name. Ruth watched for a long time. Was the woman alone? Were there men inside who might be dangerous? She saw no one else, heard no other voices. Finally, she made her decision. She stepped out of the trees. The woman saw her immediately and stood up fast, the bowl of peas clattering to the porch floor. She stared at Ruth, taking in the torn dress, the bloody face, the swollen ankle, the knife still clutched in one hand. "Lord have mercy," the woman said. "Child, what happened to you?" Ruth tried to answer, but her voice wouldn't work. Everything she'd been holding inside, all the terror and grief and pain, crashed down at once. Her legs buckled. The woman rushed forward and caught her before she hit the ground. "I've got you," the woman said. "I've got you, baby. You're safe now." Ruth wanted to believe her, but she knew better than to believe in safety. Safety was an illusion. Safety was temporary. The thing might be bound to Caldwell's land, but Caldwell's men weren't. They would be looking for her. They would never stop looking. The woman half carried Ruth into the cabin and laid her on a bed. A real bed with a mattress and blankets. Ruth had never slept in a real bed in her life. The woman brought water, clean cloth, salve for the cuts. She examined Ruth's ankle and made a sound of concern. "This is bad, child. Might be broken. We need to get you to a doctor." "No," Ruth said, finding her voice. "No doctors. They'll ask questions. They'll send me back." The woman's face changed. Understanding dawned. "You're running from a plantation." Ruth nodded. "The Caldwell place." The woman's eyes widened. "How did you know?" "Because you're not the first to come through here looking like death. And because I know what Thomas Caldwell is doing up there. Everybody knows, but nobody does anything because he's rich and connected and dangerous." The woman sat down on the edge of the bed. "My name is Sarah. This is my land. My husband and I bought it 10 years ago when we got our freedom papers. He died 5 years back. Now it's just me. I'm Ruth." "Well, Ruth, you're safe here. Nobody's going to send you back. But I need to tell you something, and you're not going to like it." Ruth's stomach tightened. "What?" "There's been talk in town. They found 2 bodies on the Caldwell property this morning. 2 women. They're saying it was some kind of animal attack, but the injuries, they don't match any animal people know." The room spun. Ruth knew intellectually that her mother and grandmother were dead. She'd seen them face the thing. But knowing and hearing it confirmed were different. The grief she'd been pushing down roared up and consumed her. She cried. For the first time since running, she let herself really cry. Sarah held her, rocking gently, making soft, soothing sounds. "I know, baby. I know. Let it out." When Ruth could breathe again, when sobs had subsided to hiccups, Sarah brought her soup. Real soup with vegetables and bits of meat. Ruth ate slowly, her stomach having trouble accepting food after so long with so little. "They're looking for a third person," Sarah said quietly. "A young girl. They're saying she killed those 2 women and ran. They've got a reward posted. $50. $50 was more money than most people saw in a year." Ruth's hands started shaking. "I didn't kill them. There was something else. Something that lives on that land. Something that hunts people who try to escape." Sarah studied her face. "You believe that?" "I saw it. Tell me." Ruth told her everything. About the plan to escape. About the sound following them through the forest. About the thing that appeared. About her mother and grandmother sacrificing themselves. About running until she thought her heart would explode. Sarah listened without interrupting. When Ruth finished, she remained quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I believe you. You do. I've heard stories about the Caldwell place. Stories that go back generations. About something wrong living there. About runners who die in ways that don't make sense. I always thought they were just stories. Ways for scared people to explain tragedy. But maybe not. Maybe some stories are true." She stood and walked to a shelf, pulling down a small wooden box. Inside lay a collection of carefully preserved papers. "These are freedom papers. Mine and my husband's. I also have blank ones. A friend worked for a judge. Used to slip me documents. I've been helping people pass through here for years." She pulled out a blank form and started filling it in. "Your name is Ruth Freeman now. Born free in Tennessee. Parents deceased. You're traveling to stay with family in Alabama." She wrote carefully, making the handwriting look official. When finished, she folded the paper and put it in an envelope. "Keep this with you always. If anyone questions you, show them this." Ruth took the envelope with trembling hands. "Why are you helping me?" Because I remember what it was like running, being terrified every second. Not knowing if I'd survive the night. Someone helped me when I needed it. Now I help others. That's how we survive. That's how we resist. One person helping another. Over the next 3 days, Sarah nursed Ruth back to health. She made poultices for the ankle. Badly sprained but not broken. She fed Ruth regular meals, more food than Ruth had eaten in months. She gave her new clothes. Plain but clean and well made. She taught her how to act free, how to carry herself with confidence, how to answer questions without seeming nervous. The key, Sarah said, is to believe you're free. If you act like you're running, people will see it. If you act like you belong, most people won't question it. On the 4th day, Sarah said it was time for Ruth to move on. The search is intensifying. They've got men combing these woods. Sooner or later, they'll come here. I can turn them away. But if they see you, if they recognize you, there's nothing I can do. She packed supplies for Ruth: food, water, an extra dress, a small amount of money. There's a town called Liberty Springs about 20 miles north. Free black community. You'll be safe there. Follow the river for 10 miles, then head northwest when you see a split oak tree. You can't miss it. 3 days walking, if you take it slow. Ruth hugged her. Thank you for everything. Don't thank me. Just live. Live free and happy. That's thanks enough. Ruth left at dawn. Her ankle remained weak but manageable. She had real supplies this time. Real papers. A real chance. She followed Sarah's directions carefully, staying off main paths, avoiding farms and plantations. On the 2nd day, she heard dogs in the distance. Her heart seized. But these were hunting dogs, not search dogs. She hid anyway, waiting until the sounds faded. She was learning to trust her instincts, to read the forest, to understand when danger was real and when it was just fear. On the 3rd day, she saw the split oak tree. She turned northwest. The terrain changed, becoming hillier. The air felt different somehow, lighter. Or maybe that was just her imagination. Maybe freedom had a smell, a taste, a feeling in the air. That evening she crested a hill and saw lights in the distance. A town, small but real, houses with smoke rising from chimneys, people moving about. She could hear voices, laughter, the sound of normal life. Ruth stood at the edge of town, suddenly terrified. What if Sarah was wrong? What if this wasn't a safe place? What if someone recognized her? What if they sent her back? But she couldn't stand on this hill forever. She couldn't live in the woods. She had to take the risk. She thought of her mother's words. "You're the bravest person I know." She tried to believe it. Ruth walked into Liberty Springs just as the sun was setting. People glanced at her but didn't stare. A young black girl traveling alone wasn't unusual here. This was a place where freedom was normal, where being black didn't automatically mean being suspicious. She stopped a woman carrying groceries. "Excuse me, ma'am. I'm looking for work. Is there anyone hiring?" The woman looked her over. "Where you from, child?" "Tennessee, ma'am. My parents died. I'm traveling to family in Alabama, but I need to earn some money first." The woman's face softened. "You look hungry. Come on, I'll feed you first. We can talk about work after." The woman's name was Margaret. She was a widow who ran a boarding house. She fed Ruth a proper meal, then offered her a room in exchange for help with cleaning and cooking. "I can't pay much," Margaret said, "but you'll have a bed and food and safety." "That's worth everything," Ruth said. She stayed in Liberty Springs. She worked for Margaret. She kept her head down and her story simple. Ruth Freeman, orphan, working to earn enough money to reach her family. People accepted this without question. But at night she dreamed. She dreamed of the thing in the forest. She dreamed of her mother and grandmother facing it in the darkness. She dreamed of its many eyes, its impossible shape, its cold breath. She woke up gasping, certain it was in the room with her. After 2 weeks, she finally told Margaret the truth. Not all of it. Not about the thing, but about Caldwell, about the plantation that still kept people enslaved, about her mother and grandmother who died helping her escape. Margaret listened gravely. I've heard whispers about that place. Nobody wants to believe it. It's easier to pretend the past is past. But I believe you, child, and I think you should talk to James. James was a former soldier. A black man who'd fought for the Union and stayed in the area after the war. He was old now, in his 60s, but he still had connections, still had influence. Ruth told James everything. This time she included the thing. The creature that guarded Caldwell's land, the supernatural binding that kept people from escaping. She expected him to laugh, to dismiss her as a traumatized child with a wild imagination. Instead, he nodded slowly. I've heard similar stories from other places. Plantations where the enslaved can't leave, even though they're legally free. It's not always supernatural. Sometimes it's just dead in fear and isolation. But sometimes there's something else, something darker. He leaned forward. There's a group of us, former soldiers, freed men, people who care about justice. We've been documenting cases like this, building evidence, trying to get the federal government to act. But we need proof. We need witnesses willing to testify. I'll testify, Ruth said immediately. I'll tell them everything. It's dangerous. If Caldwell finds out, he'll come for you. Let him come. I'm not afraid anymore. That was a lie. She was terrified, but she was also angry. Her mother and grandmother had died to give her freedom. The least she could do was use that freedom to help others. Over the next 3 months, James worked to build a case. He contacted federal marshals. He gathered testimony from other escapees. He documented the bodies found on Caldwell's land over the years. The suspicious circumstances, the pattern of death around runners. Ruth told her story to lawyers, to investigators, to anyone who would listen. Some believed her. Some thought she was confused or lying. None believed the part about the creature. They wrote it off as metaphor, trauma, a child's way of processing horror. That was fine. Ruth didn't need them to believe in the thing. She just needed them to believe in Caldwell's crimes. And there was plenty of evidence for that. In January 1888, Federal Marshal Henry Clayton rode out to the Caldwell estate with 20 armed men. They surrounded the property. They demanded access. Caldwell tried to refuse, but he didn't have a choice. The law had finally come for him. They found 63 people living in conditions identical to slavery. They found graves in the woods. They found records proving Caldwell had been hiding the truth for decades. They arrested him and 3 of his overseers. But when Marshal Clayton tried to escort the freed people off the property, something stopped them. Not violence, not resistance, just fear. Paralyzing, absolute fear. People who minutes before had been celebrating their freedom suddenly refused to cross the property line. There's something out there, they whispered. Something that hunts. Something that kills. Clayton didn't understand. He tried to reassure them. There was nothing to fear. The law protected them now. They were free. But the fear persisted. It was Ruth who figured it out. She had stayed back in Liberty Springs, too afraid to return to that place. But when she heard what was happening, she knew the thing was still there, still bound to the land, still keeping people trapped, even though Caldwell was in custody. She made a decision that terrified her but felt necessary. She asked James to take her back to the Caldwell estate. She would face the thing again. She would find a way to break the binding, or she would die trying, just like her mother and grandmother had. James tried to talk her out of it. Margaret begged her to stay. But Ruth was determined. Those people can't live free until that thing is gone. And I'm the only one who understands what it is. I'm the only one who's faced it and survived. They rode out to Caldwell's land. Ruth's heart hammered the entire journey. When they arrived, the freed people were still there, camped just inside the property line, too afraid to leave. Marshal Clayton looked frustrated and exhausted. Ruth walked up to him. "I can help, but you have to listen to me, and you have to believe me, even if it sounds impossible." She told him about the thing, about the binding, about what Caldwell's grandfather had done. Clayton listened with visible skepticism, but he was desperate enough to try anything. "What do you need?" he asked. "Fire," Ruth said, "and everyone who's ever been hurt by this place. We're going to break this binding together." That night, they built bonfires around the property. Every freed person gathered. Ruth stood in the center of the main circle, remembering everything Sarah had told her about old magics, about how bindings worked. She didn't know if she was right. She didn't know if this would work. But she had to try. She spoke to the darkness. She called out to the thing. "I know what you are. You're made from suffering, from the souls of people who died here in chains. You think you're protecting them, but you're just continuing their bondage. You think you're following orders, but those orders don't matter anymore. The man who bound you is dead. His grandson is arrested. This place is over. You don't have to exist anymore. You can let go." And nothing happened. The night stayed still. Ruth tried again. "My mother and grandmother gave themselves to you. They died so I could be free. But they wouldn't want you to keep hurting people. They would want peace. They would want rest. And so would all the others trapped inside you. Let them go. Let yourself go." The air changed. A presence manifested, not visible, but felt. The thing was listening. "We're going to burn this place," Ruth said. "We're going to burn every building, every field, every reminder of what happened here. And when it's gone, you can be gone too. You can finally rest." She nodded to Marshal Clayton. He gave the order. People took torches from the bonfires and walked toward the buildings. The main house, the cabins, the barns, everything. As the fires caught and spread, Ruth felt something shift. The presence grew stronger, but also lighter, as if a great weight was lifting. The air filled with whispers, countless voices speaking at once, words she couldn't quite hear but somehow understood. "Thank you, finally free, rest." The thing didn't disappear all at once. But as the buildings burned, as the physical evidence of Caldwell's evil turned to ash, the binding weakened. The supernatural prison that had held so many for so long began to dissolve. By dawn, everything was gone. The Caldwell estate existed only as scorched earth and memories. The freed people stood at what had been the property line. The fear was gone. The thing was gone. They could walk away, and they did, slowly at first, testing, then faster. Some ran, some walked, some fell to their knees and cried. But they all left. For the first time in decades, they were truly free. Ruth stood watching them go. She thought about her mother and grandmother, about their sacrifice, about the price of freedom. It wasn't fair that they had paid with their lives. It wasn't right. But they had made a choice, and that choice had saved not just Ruth, but dozens of others. She would carry them with her always. In her memories, in her nightmares, in her determination to make their sacrifice mean something. She was 12 years old now. She had survived what should have killed her. She had faced supernatural horror and lived. She had helped break a curse that had lasted generations. She was Ruth Freeman, and she was free. Years later, Ruth would tell this story to her own children. She would tell them about their grandmother and great-grandmother who died so she could live. She would tell them about the thing in the darkness and how hatred and cruelty could create monsters that outlived the people who made them. But she would also tell them that those monsters could be defeated. That freedom was worth fighting for. That one person, even a child, even someone small and scared and injured, could change the world. Her children would grow up free. They would never know chains. They would never know the terror of being hunted. But they would know the cost of that freedom. They would know what their ancestors paid, and they would remember. Because memory is how we honor the dead. Memory is how we prevent the past from repeating. Memory is how we keep fighting, generation after generation, until the world finally becomes what it should have been all along, a place where everyone is free, a place where the only monsters are the ones we refuse to become, a place where a child can run through darkness and find light on the other side. Ruth lived to be 78 years old. She spent her life teaching, helping other formerly enslaved people adjust to freedom, documenting the stories of survivors. She never forgot what she had seen. She never forgot what she had lost. But she also never forgot what she had won: freedom. The most precious, most costly, most essential thing in the world. And she made damn sure no one else forgot it either.